Welcome back. It is Wednesday, the 14th of June, 2023. This is episode 70 of the build series, and we're going to continue on the fuel tank portion of that series. Today there's going to be not a ton of fuel tank work being done. I'm still waiting on a couple of parts and a couple of tools to finish that up, and probably those will show up in the next couple of days. But yesterday I did locate where I need to make a hole in the rear baffle of the left tank so that I can move the fuel sender over into that second bay like we talked about yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's an 1.5 inch hole, and I hate using that fly cutter. I did an experiment with a piece of scrap using a bimetal cutting bit drill, whatever, on the drill press, and it made a nice clean hole. I'm very happy with that. So this is what we're going to be using. But once that's done, I don't think I'm going to do anything else specific to the fuel tanks. Instead, I'm going to start making a couple of tools that will help me when it comes time to hang the elevators and the rudder and the ailerons and probably the flaps as well. So I'll explain more about that when we get to it. That's what's going to happen today. Let's just get at it. It's not getting any cooler as I stand here and talk. So let's build an airplane.
Like I said in the beginning, not a lot of fuel tank specific work done on this day. The first thing that I'm doing is just creating a little pilot hole for the bimetal bit that I'm going to use, and get it in there and take some time getting it all clamped down. And this cut went pretty successfully, but only pretty successfully. I've got a little amateur tip coming up here. Once I've got it all locked down, clamped to my satisfaction, I start running that bit and slowly applying it to the baffle, and it really made a nice clean cut, nice and slow, until right here. Boom. So amateur tip, you saw that when I lifted the bit out of the piece, the whole piece of work jumped. It's still a good hole, but it got a little boogered and took a little bit more cleanup to get it done. So just stop the bit and then lift it up, and you'll be all good. And the only other thing I'm trying to figure out here is mounting the fuel sender and making sure that it's clocked correctly. I drew a center line along that hole, and I realized that actually there are some rivet holes in the access plate that do line up directly north and south on the center line. And so I'll end up, here you can see where the line goes right through those two holes, and it's clocked correctly. I'm just going to end up cutting out that piece of the access bracket and use that as the mounting plate. So that went pretty well. And that's really all that I wanted to get done on that today. Like I said, I've got a couple more tools. So the tool that I'm making is for rod end bearings. So I picked up a piece of 36-inch, 3/4 inch cold rolled steel round, and have no real experience with steel, but here I go. So it cut pretty easily with the hacksaw. I bust out that little Dremel tool to kind of get a little notch started so I could get a bite on it. And then I basically am trying to create a tool that's going to fit around a rod end bearing so that I can get in there and twist that rod end bearing into the nut plate that it mounts in, places where fat fingers can't go. So I'm creating basically a sort of specialized socket to hold that rod end bearing. So what I'm doing here is drilling a 3/8 inch hole straight through that piece of tubing that will be like the very back, like the throat of the notch or the channel. And I'm making all this up. I saw Joe Waltz's tool that he made, and I decided that looks pretty good. A lot of guys do them with PVC and make a little contraption, and I figured I would give this a try. So you see there the 3/8" hole that I drilled through, and now I'm drawing out some lines. That's where I'm going to make the cuts and turn that into a channel, so that the sort of flared part of the rod end bearing can pass freely in there. The idea is that the rod end bearing can be turned without touching the ball of the bearing itself. Turns out the little cutting discs on the Dremel tool go through that steel really easily. I didn't expect that. I thought that would be a lot more work than it was. And this was this really didn't take very long. I think this portion right here of cutting and fitting was less than 30 minutes of using probably 6 different Dremel attachments, trying to find what worked best. These little grinding drums are great, but they're too fat for that space, but they're good enough to clean up the edges and work it down a little bit. And then I go find a smaller one and try to eventually get that line cleaned up all the way out. That 3/8" hole is just, I think, a little bit smaller than the width of that sort of ball end, rod end bearing flange. So it's just a lot of back and forth, checking the fit and getting in there with the file and trying to keep it all even. It turned out, I mean, if I showed you a picture of Joe's, his tool looks like he got it from a factory, and I know he made it himself. Mine looks like I made it at home, but it also looks like I cared about how I did it. It turned out pretty nicely. So the control surfaces on the empennage, and I think that the flaps will, or rather the ailerons will work the same way. They attach with these rod end bearings. So there are attached brackets on the horizontal and vertical stabilizers, and that's where the bearing, sort of the bearing end of it, will be bolted into those brackets. The threaded end goes into nut plates, big nut plates that have been mounted to the spars of the rudder and the elevators. And so this tool allows me to get those rod end bearings threaded into the nut plates. So here I think I finally got the fit. There it goes. And then what I'm doing here is I'm drilling some 1/4" holes straight through, so that I can run like a screwdriver down through the holes, and I have a way of torquing it and twisting it. And I ended up making two of those holes, one that's sort of midpoint along the tool, and then one further back in case I need a deeper reach to do it. But I thought of something else after I was done with this, and that's, I bet somewhere in my kit I can find a socket that the outside diameter of the socket is small enough to fit snugly inside of that tube, and I bet I can put some JB Weld on there and just turn it into an actual socket that I can attach to a socket wrench. So I'm going to try that. Anyways, this is just like a little kind of buffing thing. I did a lot of deburring and cleaning up on the outside and getting the inside cleaned up, and pretty happy with how the whole thing turned out. Now I just got to get to using it. I think I grabbed some 600 grit sandpaper to clean up those little edges so I don't booger up that bearing in there. But I think it's going to be a pretty useful tool. And this turned out to be a really fun day. Doing stuff like this is fun for me, anyways. So we'll see what we get into today. But here's the final product coming up. Clean and shiny, more or less. Just buffed it up on the Scotch-Brite wheel. And there you go. It fits. So we'll see how it goes.